Okay, so why did I sand the chine with a block? This is a piece of foam with a piece of sandpaper. Why did I sand this by hand with a block instead of with my random orbital sander? Wasn't this really hard? Well, yeah, it was really hard. And the reason that I did not use a random orbital sander is because we spent a lot of energy and effort into making this chine fair and an even radius. But even when we get done with the chine with the plane, if you were to squash the chine down, if you were to squash the whole chine down into a short little distance, you would see that there are still variations in the height of the chine as we go down. You know, in other words, it's kind of snaking as it goes down, especially in small little areas. You may have one little spot that's popped up. And if you sand this with a random orbital sander, your sander comes around here and it smooths the surface really nicely. It would look just like this, be nice and smooth, but it would still have this wavy pattern. If you go and sand it with a block, and as soon as you wipe the block across the chine, the first thing the paper hits is the high spots. And after you sand a little ways, these high spots get knocked down until you're left with a straight line chine because your sandpaper has sanded down all the waves, and that leaves you with a really fair line. When you're sanding a radius like this with a block sander, you would never want to sand it like this. That's going to just put a deeper sand mark right in a small location. You always want to keep the sander in line with what you're sanding, and in this case we're trying to sand facets out of a radius. So if we only sand straight along the line of the radius, we won't really be able to sand those facets out unless we land right on the peaks of the facet. A better way to do it is to start on the bottom side and sweep up over the radius at about a 45-degree angle. So you're keeping the block in line with the radius, but a component of your sanding is going over the top of the radius, and that's knocking down the chamfers. And that feels really, really smooth. Okay, I'm ready to put the round over on the stem, and I've already done it down here the last 5 inches or so because I coated about 3 inches down from the shear line. So I need to finish it off from here down, and eventually there's going to be a bow eye about here and a 1/2 inch wide hollow back stainless steel protector from there back. And so I really only need to get a 1/2 inch radius on this, and it's almost 1/2 inch wide. Basically what I'm going to do is plane this down to where the V is gone, so that I can then put a chamfer on either side and not have to fill the center line. Okay, so I've planed it down, and I've been careful to eyeball it to make sure that I'm not getting a big wave. You can kind of see I have a high spot right there, so I might take another little pass right there because I don't want the stem to have any unfairness. It looks really fair from this angle. I don't see any high spots or anything. Now when I vacuum it out, you can see I have a lot of voids that need filling in between my tack welds of epoxy and all these wire holes. They're all going to have to be filled before I fiberglass, but the overall surface of this radius is nice and fair. Okay, at the stern, this 3/4 inch flat is going to happen pretty fast with just 3 or 4 strokes of your plane. Might take a few more up at the bow because the angle is sharper. And you can see there's a little waviness here in the plies. This is not because I have planed too deep there. It is because over here and over here we're already higher. So there's actually a little bit of unfairness in the hull, and I can further demonstrate that with a straight edge. So if I take my 48-inch straight edge and lay it across there and we look at it from the side, you probably won't be able to tell, but there you can see there's a little bit of a low spot right there, and it corresponds exactly with this spot. So it's not that this spot has gone too deep and that spot hasn't. It's that this spot was low to begin with, and you're going to run into this when you start fairing the boat. And so this is just how I want it. I'm going to leave it just like this because these spots were already high and the plane has fixed them now. So we've rounded the chines, we've rounded the stem, we've put a flat down the keel that will eventually accept our keel strip. The next thing is we're going to put a round over on the transom, bottom of the transom, and on the sides. And I'm going to just use my flush trim, or excuse me, my tilt base on my router, and I'm going to use my largest 3/8 inch radius bit and go from there. And you can see that that's a nice straight line, even though it looks wavy. It's not, because the transom panel wasn't exactly perfect. So that is a fair line. I just knocked off the corners with the plane as I did the same on the chine, and used a block sander, really important, to fair out the radius. So this is all nicely rounded over, and we are ready to glass the bottom. The only thing that I will do now is fill in all the voids, and that could take a while because you've got a lot of screw holes, a lot of places where the epoxy didn't squeeze all the way through. So the first thing I'm going to do is vacuum this panel off really well, see where all the voids are, and start filling them in. There's also some areas in the finger joint where we're going to need to fill in with putty. So I'm going to get this whole thing vacuumed off, and then we'll start puttying in all of the little voids. I've done the final vacuuming, so I've picked all the dust out of all the voids that are going to need to be filled. All these screw holes and all these little gaps around the gear chine. I'll come in with a putty knife with my thickened epoxy and fill in all those voids. I've also put a 3/4 inch painter's tape skirt around the boat, just like you would glassing like a surfboard, And this keeps any drips from running down onto the side deck under the shear, and also makes for a cut line, so I'll run a razor blade around the fiberglass once it's gelled up, and I'll peel the tape, and that will peel the overhanging fiberglass off in a nice clean line. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and fill in all these voids. Might take me a little while, and then I'll be rolling out the fiberglass and cutting it to shape.